Welcome to Rust and Rebellion. Rust and Rebellion is a steampunk-themed apocalyptic survival game. It's 2 to 8 players and takes roughly 45 to 60 minutes to play. To start, put the game board in the middle of your playing surface, and shuffle up all the cards and location mats, and place them on their respective spots on the board. Decide a starting player and give them the starting player token. Give each player a random location mat, and set the remaining location mats to the side. Give each player a food and morale tracker token, and give each player a rules card. Divvy out dice across your playing surface to be used and shared by players. To start, after shuffling the apocalypse cards, flip over the top one and read it aloud to the group. In this case, the apocalypse is the robotic rebellion. Our monster type is robots. In the top right, it will tell you the estimated time to play the apocalypse and the difficulty out of 10. In this case, it is estimated to take 1 hour and 10 minutes for a group of 4 and 9 out of 10 difficulty. After reading the story, we will set everything to the starting conditions outlined on the card. We will take the round counter and place it on 7, and all players will set their food to 7, making it so that the top of your tracker token is indicating what your food level is. In this case, food and morale are both at 7. Deal each player 1 leader card, and the number of survivor cards outlined in the starting conditions. Players can flip over their survivor cards and can place them wherever they would like into the various eligible skill piles. The survivor can only be placed in a skill pile dictated by one of the icons at the top of the survivor card. In this case, the survivor can go in engineering, scavenging, or defense. All survivors start as healthy. When a survivor gets wounded, you will turn the card around 180 degrees, showing that they are wounded and any decrease in efficiency. For example, most survivors will be moved to 1/2 efficiency. Vanguards remain at 1, but also lose a skill level. In this case, he lost the engineering skill. Read aloud the win condition for surviving the apocalypse. All players arrange their survivors however they would like in eligible skill piles. Now give each player 2 scavenge cards to start with. These cards will be used throughout the game to help you survive the apocalypse and to make it more difficult for others to survive. Before starting your turn, make sure you have your survivors set exactly how you would like. Once you start your turn, your survivors are locked in that position until after the next crisis card is played and resolved at the end of the round. You cannot rearrange survivors until then. To initiate the start of your turn, draw 1 scavenge card. If it is an event card, that card affects you immediately. In this case, it says your survivors are stressed and went to your food supply to cope. Roll 1 die to see how much food you lose. Lose 1 additional food if your morale is 4 or less. And I will discard the card in the scavenge discard pile. I will now roll for the first 3 skill piles: farming, engineering, and scavenging, in that order. The total number of dice you roll in each skill pile is dictated by the base number plus any survivors you have in that pile. In this case, I will roll 1, 2, 3 dice. The roll effects will be outlined on each location. In this case, I got 2, which means I will increase my food by 2. All locations have the same roll effects. However, each location has different combinations of skill-based numbers. I will now roll 1, 2 dice for engineering. I got a 2. 2 to 4 says increase morale by 1. I will now roll for scavenging. 1, 2. I got 4. In this case, it says draw scavenge cards equal to the roll total minus 1. Since I got a 4, I will draw 3 scavenge cards. At no point in the game may you finish your turn with more than 8 cards in your hand. If you ever have more than 8 cards in your hand by the end of your turn, you must discard cards until you are down to 8 or less. Now, you also noticed that I drew an event card in my scavenging efforts. Event cards drawn during the scavenging phase do not affect you and can be played on other players. In this case, I started with an event called stress eating. I can now play this on another player if I would like, during my turn or theirs. Since it is still my turn, I'm going to play this card on the player to my right, and they must follow the instructions on the card as outlined. The scavenge cards should each outline very clearly what the effects are and how they can be used. Attack cards can be used on other players. Event cards, unless drawn with your first card to begin your turn, can also be played on other players, and most of the rest of the cards will have some form of benefit for your community. During the game, you may come across an abatement or an intervention card. Abatement cards are used to stop events, and intervention cards are used to stop attacks. An intervention card cannot be used to stop an event, and an abatement card cannot be used to stop an attack. Now I have 3 in defense, but I do not roll 3 dice during my turn. The number you have in your defense pile is what we call your defense level, and is the number of dice you roll when fighting a monster or other players, as outlined on various cards. To finish my turn, I can use any of the scavenge cards from my hand, and when I'm done, I will pass it on to the next player to start their turn, moving clockwise. After all players have taken their turns, the last player will take the starting player token, will move the round counter down by 1, and will read aloud a crisis card. These crisis cards affect all players. In this example, the crisis outlines that all players must decrease their food by 2. If you have 8 or more survivors, decrease food by 3. I only have 7, so I am fine. And decrease morale by 1. Then states that all players must draw 1 monster card. We will start with the new starting player. And all players will fight their respective monsters using their defense level. In my case, that will be 3. 1, 2, 3. I got a 4. It says 3 plus kills the monster, and I end that fight. Now, let's say for example, I got a 1. It says kills monster, but 1 survivor is wounded. Now this is technically advanced rules, but we highly recommend following the wound/kill order. In this case, it would indicate that the first survivor to get wounded would be in the defense pile. If I only have 1, then it's just the one gets wounded, I flip it around 180 degrees. If I were to have gotten a 0, it says 1 survivor is wounded and roll again. If I have to deal a second survivor to get wounded, I will now start in the engineering pile. Now I have 2 in this one, so I get to choose which of the 2 I want to have wounded, and again switch it around 180 degrees. If you are ever fighting more than 1 monster, you must decide which monster you are fighting first, particularly when the level of monster differs. In this case, I'm going to choose the level 3 monster first. Once the monster is killed, I can move on to the next one. Once all effects of the crisis have been resolved, we begin the new round, starting with the new starting player. Before starting your turn, you can now rearrange your survivors however you would like. In this case, I have a wounded survivor. Any wounded survivor that says 1/2 does not count for a full die in a skill pile. So, for example, in engineering, I would only be allotted 1 dice for my engineering roll. If I wanted to have 2 dice and had 2 wounded survivors, I would have to pair them up, and now I would get 2 total dice. Otherwise, I can choose to put wounded survivors in the med bay. This must be done before the beginning of your turn, and they will only come out after the next crisis is resolved. Now, as I did before, when it comes to my turn, I will start by drawing a scavenge card. It is not an event, so it goes into my hand, and I roll for my 3 skill piles. After the next crisis is read and resolved, any wounded survivors in your med bay are now healed and may be placed in any eligible skill pile that you would like. You will notice that the food and morale tokens are 2-sided. And it references to see the rules when you get to a 0 or a 10 by the end of your turn. Starting with food, if you ever get to 10 during your turn, you can choose to go down to 7 food in exchange for increasing your morale by 1. This can only be done once per turn. If morale gets to 10, you can choose to take a new survivor card and move morale down to 7. If food remains at 0 by the end of your turn, you must choose 1 survivor who will die and place them in the survivor discard pile. You will then move food back up to 2. If morale gets to 0, then your community starts a rebellion. What this means, as outlined on the rules card, is that 1 survivor gets wounded, your leader is kicked out. We will put that on the bottom of the leader pile, and we will move morale back to 3. Now, you can get another leader, but it has to be on your next turn. Following this round's crisis, after it's resolved, you will now elect a new survivor to be a leader. In this case, we'll choose this survivor and discard it and swap it for a leader card. On the game board, you will realize that rounds 3, 2, and 1 are highlighted. What this means is when you get to rounds 3, 2, or 1, any player who has 4 survivors or less, including wounded survivors, leaders, or vanguards, get 2 advantages. First, any event that you draw at the beginning of your turn does not affect you. However, other players that have event cards in their hand can still play those on you. Second, you get an automatic +1 on 2 separate skill rolls of your choice that round. For example, farming, I only get 1 die. I got a 0, but I decide to use one of my automatic +1s. Here, moving this to 1, allowing me to move my food up. I can now use the second one on either engineering or scavenging. In this case, I will use scavenging because I don't have anything in the skill pile. Normally, any skill pile that you do not have a bonus or any survivors in is assumed an automatic 0 roll. In this case, it would be discarding 1 scavenge card of my choice. However, I'm going to use my automatic 1 for this, which brings me to a 1 total. But because it's -1, it simply means I do not draw any scavenge cards. Once a player gets back to 5 or more survivors, they no longer get these advantages unless they fall back down to 4 survivors or less in a future round. When you complete the final round, still read a crisis card as usual. The total number of crisis cards read should be equivalent to the number of rounds you play. After that crisis is resolved, all players can use non-attack and non-event cards from their hand as necessary to meet the win conditions. Every apocalypse win condition is different. Some allow for multiple individuals to survive, some allow for only one, and sometimes no one will survive. Whenever a win condition outlines how many survivors you must have, all cards with the survivor symbol, including leaders and vanguards, are considered survivors. If a survivor is wounded, they still count as one survivor for the win condition unless stated otherwise. And that's how you play Rust and Rebellion. I will now go on to the advanced rules. If you do not want to play the advanced rules, you can end the video here. With advanced rules, start by placing all the alignment tokens on their respective places on the board. These alignment tokens give you quite an advantage, but also come at quite the cost. As outlined on the game board, a player can only acquire these by giving up 3 food, 3 morale, and 3 scavenge cards. A player must also have a leader in order to get an alignment. I will choose 3 scavenge cards to discard, decrease food by 3, decrease morale by 3, and grab the alignment token of my choice. I now have the ability as outlined on the alignment. If a player would like to get a new alignment, they must give up the same resources as outlined on the board. In this case, I want to move from chaotic good to lawful good, so I will give up 3 scavenge cards, 3 food, and 3 morale, and get my new alignment. Players can never have more than 1 alignment token at any point. If my leader is ever killed or lost to a rebellion, the alignment goes with it. In advanced rules, if your food ever gets to 0 by the end of your turn, you can choose to embrace cannibalism. This allows you to increase your food to 5 instead of 2, but at the expense of 3 morale. And finally, if the party decides to extend gameplay, they can choose to start another apocalypse following the end of the first one. Simply get a new apocalypse card, and as before, read the story, starting conditions, and win conditions to the whole party. We recommend leaving food and morale levels as they are, but allowing players to get to the total number of survivors plus leaders as outlined on the card. In this case, 5 survivors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 leader. We also recommend that all players keep their existing locations. And we will also move the round counter to 5. Time to start another apocalypse. We hope you enjoy the game. Please reach out at etheralloy.com if you have any questions.